The sun rose like any other day over Uvalde, Texas. But by sundown, 21 families would never be the same. Because somewhere between school bells and gunfire, America failed. Again. They woke up to laughter, to cereal bowls clinking, to backpacks being zipped. It was Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. Just 2 days before summer break, and for most of the students at Robb Elementary, the promise of sunshine and ice cream trucks was just around the corner. The town of Uvalde, nestled quietly between San Antonio and the Mexican border, is the kind of place you might overlook on a map. Small, rural, peaceful. A tight-knit community where almost everyone speaks a mix of English and Spanish, and where the elementary school stood not just as a place of learning, but as a place of safety, of laughter, of beginnings. Robb Elementary taught 2nd through 4th grade. The halls were filled with colorful drawings, construction paper butterflies, math charts, and birthday signs. The kids, most just 9 or 10 years old, still brought packed lunches from home, still raised their hands, still believed in the world. That morning they trickled in just like they always did, one tiny footstep after another. Some ran straight to their favorite teacher, others chatted in the hallways about what they'd do during the break. The school was bustling with innocence. One of those children was Amarillo Garza, just 10 years old, who loved art and making TikToks. Another was Maite Rodriguez, who dreamed of being a marine biologist and had just earned a spot on the honor roll. There was Xavier Lopez, who had a contagious smile and was eagerly showing off his graduation certificate from earlier that morning. The kids were vibrant, alive, preparing for a future they'd never see. Uriel and the teachers, Irma Garcia and Eva Morales, stood at the front of room 112, guiding their class like they had done for years. Veterans of the profession, beloved by parents and children alike. They were more than teachers. They were protectors, mentors, second mothers to these young souls. No one saw it coming. Just a few miles away, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos was already in motion. He had posted cryptic messages on social media the night before, DMs that hinted at violence, warnings that no one took seriously until it was too late. At home, he retrieved an AR-15 style rifle, recently purchased just after his 18th birthday, and over 1,600 rounds of ammunition. He wore body armor. This wasn't a snap decision. It was a plan. At 11:28 a.m., Ramos crashed his grandmother's pickup truck in a dry ditch behind Robb Elementary. Witnesses heard the tires screech, saw him climb out with the rifle in hand. A nearby funeral home worker saw him fire shots at passers-by, then climb a school fence and walk casually, eerily casually, toward the west entrance. 11:33 a.m. He was inside. By then, the school was already going into lockdown, but it was too late. In under 3 minutes, he had entered room 111 and then room 112, classrooms filled with children and teachers. The gunfire began, deafening, relentless. Some students hid under desks, some called 911 from their teacher's phone, some whispered into their wrists, praying they'd see their parents again. In one of the rooms, a child smeared blood on herself and played dead to survive. The terror was unspeakable. It wasn't just chaos, it was systemic silence, a deafening roar of inaction to follow. But in this first section, we stay frozen in the moment, before the country began asking how and why. Because this part of the story belongs to the children. To Layla Salazar, who loved swimming and won 6 races in the school Olympics. To Jose Flores, who loved baseball. To Eliana Garcia, who wanted to be a cheerleader. And to Jacqueline Cazar, whose cousin was in the very same classroom, both of whom would never come home. They were more than names. They were smiles, stories, laughter in the lunchroom, shoes that lit up when they walked, stickers on water bottles. They were kids, real kids, living real lives until they were interrupted by something darker than nightmares. And for their teachers, Eva and Irma, there was no hesitation. According to survivors, they shielded their students with their own bodies. They tried to calm them, hush them, protect them from the horror on the other side of the door. Irma Garcia was later found in a protective embrace over her students, She died trying to save them. 2 days later, her husband, Joe Garcia, collapsed and died of a heart attack while bringing flowers to her memorial, leaving their 4 children orphaned. The innocence of morning had become the horror of midday. But it was just beginning. In this story, the most haunting part is not just the tragedy of lost lives, but the 77 minutes that would follow, when help stood outside and the screams inside were met with silence. Before we talk about outrage, failure, and protest, we must sit here, in the stillness of what should have been just another ordinary school day, a day like any other. Until it wasn't. They left home with dreams in their eyes. They packed their lunches. They wore their favorite shoes. They trusted the world would keep them safe. But it didn't. And for 77 minutes, no one came. He crashed a truck into a ditch behind the school, walked calmly toward the building with a rifle in hand, and no one stopped him. The sound of the crash echoed through the quiet streets of Uvalde. It was just after 11:28 a.m., and what many mistook for a blown tire or a reckless driver was, in truth, the beginning of an unspeakable nightmare. Salvador Ramos, 18 years old, had driven his grandmother's Ford pickup truck through a fence and into a ditch behind Robb Elementary School. He had just shot his grandmother in the face at their home, a final act of defiance against the only person left in his life who tried to help him. She would survive, barely, and call 911. But for Robb Elementary, time was running out. He exited the wreckage with an AR-15 style rifle slung across his chest, wearing tactical gear, and carrying over 1,600 rounds of ammunition. Witnesses from the nearby funeral home watched in horror as he fired at them, narrowly missing, before climbing the fence and walking unfazed toward the open west entrance of the school. There was no alarm, no lockdown, no one standing between him and the children. At 11:33 a.m., he entered the school, just 5 minutes after crashing the truck. From that moment, everything unraveled. He made his way down the hall, reportedly firing into classrooms and at walls, shattering glass and sending echoes of terror throughout the building. Children screamed, teachers shouted, and then he turned left, opened the door to room 111, and walked in. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. What followed was over 100 rounds fired in less than 3 minutes. In that room filled with fourth-grade students, children ran for corners, hid under desks, held hands, and prayed in whispers. One girl, in a move far beyond her years, would later say she covered herself in her classmates' blood and played dead. It was the only reason she survived. In the adjoining room 112, teachers Ava Morales and Irma Garcia attempted to protect their students. One of them used a phone to dial 911. Another tried to shield the children with her own body. The gunfire was relentless. Over and over and over again. 911 calls began flooding in from inside the school. Parents were alerted. Panic swept through the town. But something unimaginable was happening. The police had arrived and they weren't going in. He was inside for 3 minutes, and law enforcement would stay outside for 77. By 11:35 a.m., just 2 minutes after Ramos entered the school, Uvalde police officers were inside the building. They approached the classrooms and heard the gunfire. One officer even attempted to engage, but was grazed by shrapnel and pulled back. That moment right then was likely the best chance they had to stop the shooter and save lives. Instead, they retreated. They fell back, and they waited. What followed was not just a massacre. It was a collapse of everything a community trusts to protect its children. Officers with body armor, rifles, and shields stood in the hallway. Some had military backgrounds. Some had trained for scenarios exactly like this. And still, they waited. The shooter continued inside the classroom, and children inside were calling 911, begging, whispering, bleeding. Children were dialing 911 from inside the room, while nearly 400 officers stood in the hallway, listening. Outside the school, chaos had erupted. Parents raced to the scene. Mothers screamed. Fathers shouted at officers. Some tried to jump fences. One woman was handcuffed and tackled when she tried to break past the perimeter to save her children. Another parent screamed into a live Facebook stream, "They're just standing there. They're not doing anything." They were right. From 11:33 a.m. to 12:50 p.m., a full 77 minutes, no one entered the classroom to stop the shooter. The official reason given? They were waiting for a key to a door that later investigations revealed may have been unlocked the entire time. Meanwhile, shots were still heard. Movement was reported. At least 2 more students died during that time who may have survived if help had come sooner. One bled out slowly while whispering on the phone with a dispatcher. Even the Border Patrol Tactical Unit, BORTAC, that eventually breached the classroom wasn't originally called in. They showed up because they happened to be nearby. When they finally entered the classroom at 12:50 p.m., Ramos was shot and killed. His body hit the ground beside the tiny bodies of children, most already gone. Some had been so disfigured by the weapon that DNA from their parents was required to identify them. The classroom was described by law enforcement as a horror scene. Blood was everywhere. Tiny bodies, slippers, backpacks, shattered glass. Silence. This was not just a tragedy. This was a moment in American history where everything broke at once: security, courage, trust, and time. And the time is what haunts the most. 77 minutes. Children hiding under desks, whispering into phones. Some bleeding, some already gone, and hundreds of officers outside waiting for someone to give an order. He walked in with a gun. They stood outside with guns. And for 77 minutes, America held its breath and failed its children. It wasn't just the gunfire that killed them. It was the silence, the waiting, the minutes that passed when every second mattered. When Salvador Ramos opened fire inside Robb Elementary, the clock began ticking. At 11:33 a.m., the first shots rang out. Teachers screamed, students ducked, bullet holes tore through the classroom walls. By 11:35 a.m., law enforcement had already entered the building. 2 minutes. That's all it took for the police to reach the shooter's location, but that's not where the story ends. It's where it begins. The officers heard gunfire. They knew where it was coming from. One even approached the classroom door but was grazed by shrapnel and pulled back. Then came the pause, the hesitation, the decision, conscious or not to go in. And then, time began to slow. For the children trapped inside, every tick of the clock felt like a lifetime. 11:36. The hallway fills. More officers arrive, weapons drawn, shields raised. But no one makes a move toward the classroom. The hallway grows crowded. The shooter is quiet for now, inside room 111 and 112, likely reloading or surveying what he's done. Officers wait. Some peek around corners. Some look to their superiors. Outside, parents begin to gather. The news begins to spread. Inside the classroom, the first 911 calls begin from students. Whispering, crying, begging. 11:38 a.m. a little girl dials 911. A 10-year-old child inside room 112 calls 911 from her teacher's phone. Her voice is shaking. She says they've been shot, that the teacher is down. She begs for help. The dispatcher asks, "Can you stay quiet?" She says yes. But that help doesn't come. At this point, more than a dozen officers are standing just feet from the classroom door. The children's voices are on the line. Their location is known, and still no breach. 11:44 a.m. More shots fired. Gunfire erupts again inside the classroom. Officers flinch, but no one moves forward. Inside, children scream again. Some may have been alive bleeding, hiding before those rounds were fired. Some may have died during those minutes of hesitation. You don't have to be a soldier to know. When children are screaming, you don't wait. 11:50 a.m. Officers discuss keys. Authorities begin to request a master key. Rumors start to spread that the classroom door is locked, but later investigation will reveal something chilling. The door may have been unlocked the entire time, or at the very least, easily breachable. Still, they wait. Outside, the crowd of parents has grown frantic, screaming, shoving, desperate. One mother pleads with an officer. "My daughter's in there! Let me in!" Another father tries to rush the building and is tackled to the ground. 12:03 p.m., another 911 call. A child inside, room 112 places another call. She says there are still people alive. She whispers that several classmates are hiding under tables. She asks, "Please send help." The line stays open for over 13 minutes. Nothing happens. The officers are still standing in the hallway, some checking their phones, others looking to the commanding officer, Pete Arredondo, the school district police chief, who reportedly had no radio at the time. There is no unified command, no clear direction, no rescue. 12:10 p.m., the whisper of breathing. A dispatcher notes from a live 911 call. She says 8 to 9 students are still alive. It's a ray of hope, a tragic thread to hold on to. The shooter hasn't killed everyone. There's still time. And yet it passes. 12:15 p.m., Border Patrol arrives. A heavily armed unit from BORTAC, the Border Patrol Tactical Team, arrives on the scene. They are prepared to act, but even they are told to wait for keys, for approval, for orders. Inside the classroom, children bleed. Some are unconscious, some are losing hope. One girl later said she whispered, "Please, God, I don't want to die." 12:36. Parents still no entry. The children have now been trapped with the shooter for over an hour. It's been more than 60 minutes since officers first arrived. The national news is beginning to catch on. Helicopter footage shows police surrounding the school. But no one is inside. The world watched. And for 77 minutes, the doors stayed shut. 12:46 p.m., a breach is ordered. After what feels like an eternity, BORTAC officers defy the delay. They stack outside room 111. They breach the door, engage the shooter, and finally end the siege with a burst of gunfire. At 12:50 p.m., Salvador Ramos is dead. But for many inside, the damage was long done. They find 19 children and 2 teachers already dead. Several others are wounded, emotionally shattered, or in shock. Some had survived by hiding under their friends' bodies. The silence that follows is unbearable. No aftermath. The timeline unravels. The official timeline of law enforcement's response becomes national scandal. 376 officers had responded from 23 different agencies. No one took control of the scene. Multiple chances to intervene were missed. Parents were physically prevented from saving their own children. An investigation would later reveal that some officers had more training, more weapons, and more information than previously believed. They knew what was happening, and they still didn't go in. It was never about a lack of gear or firepower. It was a failure of will, of leadership, of humanity. The truth is devastating. Children called for help while help stood outside. Officers had shields and rifles and still waited. The door may have been unlocked the whole time, and parents were handcuffed while their children were slaughtered. 77 minutes, a number that will never leave the minds of those who lived through that day or those who watched in horror from afar. In the time it takes to watch a movie, they watched a classroom die. The gunfire stopped, but the silence kept screaming. Because what followed wasn't healing, it was rage. The classroom was finally silent at 12:50 p.m. on May 24th, 2022. But the world was just beginning to speak. What began as quiet confusion outside Robb Elementary turned to fury as parents learned the unthinkable, that their children had been alive, that they had called 911, and that police had waited 77 minutes in the hallway. News footage captured desperate fathers banging their fists on patrol cars. Mothers collapsed in grief, screaming their child's name into the air. One man stood completely still, eyes blank, as his world unraveled in front of flashing blue lights and television cameras. The tragedy was no longer private. It was national. America watches Uvalde. That night, television screens across the country flickered with images of Uvalde, a small Texas town. Its pain now broadcast to millions. Reporters from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Telemundo, and NPR flooded the scene. Candlelight vigils were held beside the school sign, now buried beneath teddy bears, crosses, and framed photos. The names of the 21 victims scrolled endlessly across every channel. And slowly the details emerged. The New York Times published leaked timelines. Body cam footage began to circulate, showing officers sanitizing their hands and checking their phones while children lay dying on the other side of the wall. Whispers of cowardice turned into televised accusations. The families didn't need investigators to tell them something went wrong. They felt it in the silence, a failure of leadership. At the center of the firestorm was Pete Arredondo, chief of the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police Department. Arredondo had no radio that day. He reportedly believed the shooter was barricaded and that children were no longer in danger, despite 911 calls clearly contradicting that assumption. When pressed by media, Arredondo refused to speak publicly. He stayed behind closed doors. When questioned by investigators, he lawyered up. And when the families demanded answers, he offered none. The Uvalde city government initially refused to release body cam footage or official records, citing ongoing investigations. That silence only made things worse. Eventually, pressure from the public and from grieving parents forced the city to act. Investigations and fallout. In July 2022, the Texas House of Representatives released a 77-page investigative report. Its findings were damning. 376 law enforcement officers responded. Many had superior weapons, armor, and training. Yet they waited confused, disorganized, and deferential to non-existent command. There were systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making. The report didn't just blame Arredondo. It blamed every level of law enforcement from the school police to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, to Border Patrol, and even federal marshals. The words unacceptable failure were repeated like a chorus. Uvalde had become a case study in what not to do during a mass shooting. This wasn't just a failure of one man. It was a failure of training, of communication, of courage, resignations, firings, and lawsuits. The backlash was swift. Pete Arredondo was placed on administrative leave in June and fired in August. Multiple Uvalde police officers were suspended or reassigned. The Uvalde School District Police Force was temporarily disbanded. Families filed multiple lawsuits against the school district, city, gun manufacturers, and law enforcement. A culture of finger-pointing followed. Officials at every level denied responsibility. Press conferences devolved into shouting matches. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who had initially praised the law enforcement response, admitted he had been misled. The families refused to stay silent, but amid the chaos, it was the families who carried the loudest voice. Kimberly Matarubio, mother of 10-year-old Lexi Rubio, became a national figure. She testified before Congress just weeks after her daughter's death, describing how Lexi had made the honor roll and never got to celebrate. Her speech brought lawmakers and viewers alike to tears. We don't want you to think about her voice. We want you to hear it, because she used it and no one listened. Her advocacy didn't stop there. She launched the Lives Robbed Foundation alongside other parents and began lobbying for stricter gun laws. Javier Cazares, father of Jacqueline, also refused to back down. He told the press that he was ready to charge in himself that day without a gun because the police wouldn't. Their voices became a force, a movement, marches and movements. In the following months, the Uvalde tragedy sparked nationwide protests. Students staged school walkouts in solidarity. Activist groups like March for Our Lives returned to national prominence. Survivors from other school shootings like Parkland and Sandy Hook flew to Uvalde to stand beside the families. Gun control legislation was proposed in Congress. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, bipartisan gun legislation passed. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, signed in June 2022, included provisions for red flag laws and expanded background checks for gun buyers under 21. It wasn't everything the families wanted, but it was something. Their children's voices had been silenced, but now the nation was listening, remembering the lost. Back in Uvalde, healing was slow. The site of Robb Elementary was turned into a makeshift memorial, then later slated for demolition. A permanent memorial is being designed in consultation with the victims' families. Scholarships, murals, and art installations now dot the town in honor of the 21 victims. A local artist painted portraits of each child, not in grief, but as they lived. Their smiles, their favorite colors, their dreams. Because this story is not just about how they died, it's about how they lived and how the world chose to remember them. From the silence of those classrooms, a generation of voices rose. Not just to mourn, but to change the world. When the last siren faded and the cameras turned away, Uvalde remained, not just as a town, but as a wound one that the nation would carry forever. The 77 minutes of silence that unfolded inside Robb Elementary School on May 24, 2022, became more than a timeline. They became a symbol of hesitation, of institutional failure, of what happens when fear outweighs duty. But in the wake of that silence, voices rose. Families, activists, students, and even survivors, they refused to be quiet. And from that refusal, a legacy was born. The school that was erased, Robb Elementary, is gone. By the end of 2022, the decision was made to demolish the school building. No child, no teacher, no staff member would be asked to walk those hallways again. No one would sit in room 111 or 112. Demolition didn't come easy. For some, tearing down the structure felt like erasing evidence. For others, it was the first act of mercy, a way to protect children from the shadows left behind. As bulldozers tore through brick and dust filled the air, families stood nearby in silence. It wasn't just a school coming down. It was a place that should have been sacred, but was left unguarded. A new vision for the future. In its place, plans for a permanent memorial began. Architects, trauma experts, and most importantly, the victims' families were brought together to design a space that wouldn't just mourn the past, but inspire the future. Early concepts featured a circle of light pillars, each representing a child or teacher lost. Reflecting pools etched with the names of victims. Quiet places for families to sit, grieve, and remember. And walkways lined with the children's favorite colors, hobbies, and quotes. This would be no ordinary memorial. It would be one built by grief and by love. The rise of new voices. After the shooting, many parents withdrew from public life, consumed by grief, wrapped in the slow, quiet horror of loss. But in time, some stepped forward, not as politicians, but as parents who couldn't bear silence anymore. The Lives Robb Foundation became their platform. Founded by multiple families, including Kimberly Matarubio and Brett Cross, it demanded federal assault weapon bans, stricter background checks, mandatory school safety reforms, mental health services for surviving children. They marched in Austin. They flew to Washington, D.C. They cried on national television, holding up portraits no parent should ever have to display. They weren't just mourning children. They were trying to protect yours. A shift in legislation. In a rare moment of bipartisanship, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was signed into law just 1 month after the shooting. It marked the first major piece of federal gun legislation in almost 30 years. The bill didn't go as far as families hoped, that there were no bans on AR-15s or high-capacity magazines. But it closed the boyfriend loophole on domestic abusers, incentivized states to adopt red flag laws, enhanced background checks for buyers under 21, and expanded funding for mental health and school safety. It wasn't justice, but it was progress. Healing in the classroom. Across Uvalde, Teachers and students returned to school in fall 2022 under unimaginable weight. New schools were chosen, classrooms redesigned, trauma counselors were stationed at nearly every building. Children underwent therapy sessions designed for PTSD, some too young to even spell the word. Some students never returned. Some families moved away altogether. Others stayed because this was their town, and they wouldn't let the shooter take more than he already had. Teachers wore bracelets with the names of victims. Some left empty desks in the corner as a quiet tribute. Others planted trees outside their classrooms, living reminders that even in tragedy, something can grow. Memorials in paint and stone, tributes bloomed across the town and the nation. A muralist painted bright portraits of each victim, full of smiles, their favorite cartoon characters, and their dreams. Local businesses adopted stars with victims' names, placing them on windows and counters. A scholarship fund was created in honor of teacher Irma Garcia and her husband Joe, who died 2 days after the shooting, a testament to love and heartbreak. And around the world, people sent letters. Some were addressed simply to the families in Uvalde. Inside were prayers, poems, even drawings from children as far away as Japan and Italy. What hasn't changed? But not all scars heal evenly. Some officers involved in the failed response returned to duty. Lawsuits continue to drag through the courts. AR-15 rifles remain legal in Texas. And many parents say they feel forgotten as the media moves on to the next tragedy. In truth, Uvalde's legacy is still being written. Because even now, the silence lingers in other classrooms across America, and families in towns like Buffalo, Nashville, and Oxford know it too well. The question isn't just what happened in Uvalde. It's whether we let it happen again. A final promise. 1 year after the shooting, on May 24, 2023, the town gathered again. Candles were lit, names were read aloud, bells rang 21 times, and in the golden hour light, families stood shoulder to shoulder, not broken, but bound together by memory and mission. And above them, written on banners, classroom doors, and chalk drawings, 5 words echoed across the town. We will never forget you. Not just for what was lost, but for what their loss must now build. Their names are more than etched in stone. They are etched in us. And from 77 minutes of silence comes a lifetime of purpose,